So just quickly, before I get to the guide proper, the number one tip that you want to keep in mind is that if you fail to get all of the states that are called by Germany into your faction, whether by annexing them or your faction members annexing them. If that fails, as happened in this particular game, where Romania decided to free some state, well, not free some states, change the government of Germany to be democratic, and those democratic German Republic states, which wherever they were situated, I think maybe there was like the capital was Ostpreußen, but anyway, those democratic German Republic states were German cause, and the German Republic wasn't part of my faction, so that seemingly ruined my chances of getting the achievement. But you just need to wait for Soviet Russia to save the day, because when Soviet Russia starts invading Poland, which they will do, because Poland didn't get invaded by the Germans, or the Germans didn't successfully invade Poland, depending on when you came in with your Entente. Whenever they do that, that's going to scare, obviously, the remaining states in Central Europe, and they very well may join your faction, which is what happened here. So I annexed a lot of Germany. Romania had had created this democratic Germany, which wasn't part of my faction. They didn't like me. I decided to give all their territory back, basically, so they wouldn't hate me, and then wait until the Soviets attack Poland, and then job done. I get the achievement. I get Germany into my faction, and then I get the achievement. So yeah. Hi, I'm Nick, and this is France in Hearts of Iron 4. I've been playing this particular scenario of France in 1936 for a few days, maybe even a week, all in the aim and goal of getting the Big Entente achievement, which requires you to, you or your people in your faction, after taking the Little Entente focus in your French Entente faction, to control or own all of Germany's cause. One little, I guess, warning I should give you is that if Germany successfully takes the Sudetenland, as in demands it, and the Czechoslovakia gives it to them, then those will become German cause. So I've actually been burnt by that, in that I freed Czechoslovakia from German rule, and then Czechoslovakia wasn't part of my faction, because I'd liberated them, not puppeted them or something like that. But in any case, that then meant that I didn't have those two states that were Eastern and normal Sudetenland that had become German cause, and thus I failed to get the achievement that time. But anyway, I'm going to very quickly, or at least attempt to very quickly, go through all the tabs and how I set up my game, and then we're basically going to fast forward to when the war actually happens, because who wants to wait around watching as I choose techs and slowly build up my units? So, in terms of national focuses, I am going to be going government reform. I'm going to go straight down to strengthen government, and then while strengthen government is strengthening the government, because essentially that gives you a buff for 365 days, and you can't take defensive stratagems until you've finished that buff, until you've strengthened the government, and then you can't take army reform until you've taken defensive stratagems. So anyway, I try to go to strengthen government as soon as possible. That will boost you up to about 50% national unity, which actually would become 60% once you've removed the disjointed government debuff thing, which is what you get for getting defensive stratagems. After that, I've been going down to get the extra research. So essentially taking those 4 national focuses and then taking Invite Yugoslavia and Invite Romania, and then starting on my focuses to get to army reform, and then coming back after I got my army reform to get the 5th research slot. You may prefer to just go into army reform, just do all the way down to 1 step before army reform, so you can go to defensive stratagems, then army reform, but then you're missing out on the research. It depends on what you'd personally prefer, but I think you can get away with not having the extra research slot, but I'm not going to do that. In terms of focuses, I'm really tempted to take an aggressive focus because what we're going to be attacking, division attack is going to be more useful than division defense, and the kinds of units we're going to use, well, we're going to be using light tank models more than heavy tank models anyway, and just suits the kind of playstyle that you're going to be, because you're actually going to take the attack to Germany. However, there is one huge thing, the difference between levy en masse and motorized focus, which means that you're an insane idiot if you don't take levy en masse. 10% cheaper infantry equipment production cost is probably the most useful thing in the entire French focus trees. Everything there does not compare to 10% cheaper infantry equipment. Comparing that to 10% cheaper motorized, considering the fact that I feel, well, in my experience, one motorized factory, just one military factory of motorized, provides all the trucks my entire army needs. From the composition of divisions, I guess, that I've been using, that provides all the trucks I need, and I could just double that for two factories so easily. So considering that you're going to need at least I would say probably at least 15 infantry equipment factories by the end, by the time you start getting into the war, or at least certainly once you've started taking German factories, because this is really the industrial heartland down here, or in the Rhineland, and then there's some good things in Bavaria as well, but not actually as good. But yeah, you look at the number of unlocked slots in these states, and this has a lot of factories. So yeah, once you take the Rhineland, you will have the factories to build all that. But yes, you'll be putting a lot of infantry equipment, a lot of artillery, but not many trucks. So that's my advice on that. In terms of research, just your normal kind of thing, like get your construction, because you're trying to build up your factories. The weakness of France is that it's not really mobilized, and it's not really mobilized industrially either. Like, look how much empty factory space it starts the game with, and it has 50 factories, but only 6 of those are military factories. So yes, it needs to build a lot of military factories by the end of by the time the war starts, and before that, so that you can actually build your equipment. So construction's always important for every country leading up to the war. So I just go the normal kind of like research speed, and think maybe I should be skipping that, but you do need eventually to have the encryption and decryption, so you're kind of forced to take the computing things, and if you're going to take them, you may as well take them as soon as possible. The one thing that I would actually suggest is, despite the fact that we have this debuff here of Victors of the Great War that increases land doctrine research time by 75%. Despite that fact, and you might thus intuitively or gut feeling feel like, oh, I should wait until I've completed army reform before I start doing land doctrines. No, you're going to do 2 land doctrines. I choose to do superior firepower because that's a much better offensive doctrine tree than grand battle plan, so we're losing one research essentially by doing that. But I think this is a lot more useful for taking the fight to the Germans. You might prefer mobile warfare, maybe, or just stay in. Whatever you do, you have time to research 2 land doctrines before army reform comes into being, and you may as well get those 2 land doctrines, because that's actually going to be one of the most important things, because you need the army to be better, and you're actually going to be very streamlined in terms of other things, because you start the game having pretty much researched all the stuff you're going to build. By the time Weapons 2 comes along, you are going to be already in war or getting ready for war, and if you swap in Weapons 2 into your factory is going to take such a huge efficiency hit that it might actually stop you be able to properly supply your troops with weapons, so that can be a bit risky to do that. Similarly, you might get improved artillery to out before the war starts, or you might not, but pretty much you've already got those researched, you've already got your motorized researched, you already have the tanks you're going to use research, unless you really prefer heavy tanks, and so the only real things you have to research is some support companies. I like to research SPGs, and then just the buff research things here, and then maybe some naval or air doctrines, or maybe even 1936 fighters. So there isn't actually much that you have to research. You are just going to put most of your research into just making your industry better. So yeah, you may as well give up that slot to land doctrines. Diplomacy, there isn't really much to say about that. Yeah, because you're going to get your faction members just through these national focuses. Trades, I mean, you start the game with a lot of civilian factories anyway, so you can just start trading from the start. France only really lacks oil. Once you get huge amounts of factories, which is going to happen when you start taking German territory, you might need to start importing other things, but at the start of the game you just need to import oil, and most of the time that oil is actually only going to be, that initial oil is going to be lacking there, but most of the time most of your oil demand is actually going to come from ships, which you may or may not like to trade away a civilian factory to get the oil for. Ships won't be vital to your possessing ships would be vital, but having a massive navy isn't going to be vital, because you just need to do the job, and you start with a navy strong enough to defeat Italy's anyway. In terms of navy, what you're going to want to do is, this is like a World War One style submarine there, so you'd want to tone that down from building 7 to just building 1, and then you're going to build infinite amounts of submarines too. I prefer to, I personally think 2 lines of submarines, and one of them, say the one that you have 3 in, will be supplying your submarine fleet in the Mediterranean, and then you have a submarine fleet just up north to attack German supply lines. Then you have those, and then you have your main battle fleet. Obviously, you're probably going to want to bring all your navies all together and reorganize them. I reorganize into 4 fleets. Personally, I reorganize into 1 main battle fleet, one convoy escort fleet, which just has cruisers and destroyers in it, and two submarine fleets, as I mentioned. So you're going to want light cruisers and destroyers for that main battle fleet to make it be able to more easily close on the submarines and light ship screens of the enemy fleet, because I don't think you start the game with enough destroyers really, and enough light cruisers, certainly not enough light cruisers, and you can get into situations, naval battles, where Italy will just torpedo your battleships, and that's bad. So that's that in terms of naval, but the really important thing in terms of military production. So I would generally say start 2 or 3 for support equipment, but then boost that up to 5 later on. I like to do this because you're probably going to be lacking. France doesn't start with many artillery in its units, so you're actually going to have to make up a bigger deficit in terms of artillery than infantry weapons at the start. I personally like to build a division, like my armored divisions be essentially 4 SPGs. sorry, I got a cold. I shouldn't do this when I've got a cold. 4 SPGs, 2 motorized, and 2 light tanks, and then supports, and that requires a line of 5 SPGs factories and 6 light tank factories. Actually, just boost this up. So essentially what you want to have is actually that should go there. Infantry equipment, this is what I do. Infantry equipment 1 line, artillery 2 lines, 7 light tanks, just because the ratio isn't quite exactly 6 to 5. 7, 5, and then 1 motorized, and then start with 2 lines of infantry equipment, 2 lines of artillery, repeat that, except with 6. So basically 10, 10, 6, 5, 10, 10, 6, 5, onwards for the rest of your production lines, essentially, or production queue. And I find that just balances out as you start getting new factories from building new factories or capturing new factories. That means that you're going through each piece of equipment equally, rather than just like putting giant lumps of 15. It's much harder to balance and much harder to make sure that the new factories are getting spread out evenly. Doing that, I generally find that I can build, firstly, I can train all my troops up. And that's actually a really important thing I should tell you, in case you don't know that you can do this. We're going to change most of our infantry divisions, most of our divisions, into just infantry. So we're going to be changing all the colonial to normal infantry, all your cavalry to normal infantry. We're going to keep these motorized ones as we're going to convert those into those same tank divisions I mentioned with the SPGs. And I have been keeping these Alpines. They're a really weird template. Essentially, I've been removing one Mountaineer battalion and adding 7 artillery. So that makes a 40 combat width unit that's really big and strong and can just fight and hold these Alps, because actually the Alps can be a tough nut to crack at times. By the war start, I expect to have So I've trained up my units, having told them um, not to replenish their stocks of weapons, and then just before the war, I tell them, oh, you can take equipment again, and then I stop them exercising, and so while they're exercising, they're damaging equipment. But if you tell them they can't take any more equipment, then they just damage their existing stock of equipment, and because it's a percentage, it's like a loss of the percentage of equipment they have. It actually means that you lose a lot less equipment if you do that. And they can happily exercise with very low equipment numbers, and then you've kept this stockpile of all the equipment that you're going to eventually give to them when the war starts, and then just before the war starts, you give them that equipment, they're fully equipped, and they go fighting. So, yeah. Just before the war, generally, I have enough to replenish all my troops' equipment, plus, I think, 5 more armoured divisions and 15 to 20 more infantry divisions. I think actually last time, because the war didn't actually kick off until 1939, I had 25 more infantry divisions and the five and a half, 5 more armored divisions with 5 more on the way, and 5 more Alpine divisions, and those Alpine divisions are basically twice the size of a normal infantry division, so they count as 10, I guess. And that was more than enough to crush Italy, and crush Germany. Germany doesn't actually have enough troops to fight both fronts, so you will be able to defeat them. Even with your starting army, you can defeat Germany. This is the message you could take from this. You just need to be very careful about it. You will lose if Germany or Italy make a breakthrough through your lines, because you have enough strength to hold a line of minimal, basically a solid line, and especially Italy, going down with a solid line, you can easily defeat Italy with that, because your units will be stronger than their units, mainly because you're a human player and you know how to actually design divisions, and the AI doesn't currently. But as soon as that line gets much too elongated, you start losing that. By the time, if you hold a steady line going through Germany, by the time your line starts to get elongated, Germany's already really lost, and it will have to spread its units thin. And you will have all this industry that would have allowed you to build more units. But yeah, just don't allow a breakthrough. There is, especially if you put a front line, I'll say this is my final thing before we skip forward to the actual fight. If you put forward a front line here, and then you tell them to attack forwards, give an attack order. When they get to this province here, that front line will have kept on going, and it will go here, and it won't put a line there. The border between that province and this province, yeah. It will put a front line here, it won't put a front line there. Germany maybe knows this, or I don't know, but or maybe we'll see it, and it will put armored divisions here and put a spearhead through there, and suddenly, and go up to Luxembourg, for instance, suddenly all of your infantry that have been holding this front line against the Germans will now be cut off from supply and encircled, and then you lose the game. Similarly, if you let Italy encircle you around here, then you lose the game. But if you're pretty smart, or not smart, but just sensible, and use a pincer movement against Italy, I would suggest six divisions of armor land in that province there in Sicily. Not Palermo, because if they probably will, they're more likely to have troops in the city guarding the city, and also the city gets a lot more defense than just some random field. So land in that province from like Tunisia, which also means that you don't need to go through like the Tyrrhenian Sea, which means that this sea zone here, and obviously Italy will have a much easier time stocking up with units here, and also sending naval bombers here. So if you can avoid going through the Tyrrhenian Sea with your convoys, going through this route, then that's much better. So I land 6 armoured divisions there and tell them to attack up to there, and then I use the rest of my armoured divisions and tell them to attack down to there, and then you've conquered Italy. And all your other guys need to do is just keep on slowly moving forward. And then you can take your armoured up and start doing a spearhead straight for Berlin. And then once you cut off then you go to each coast, cut off the supply routes of all the Germans that were fighting against this flank of your infantry, and then all the Germans who were fighting off that flank of your infantry, or all the ones that were fighting in the Polish, then you've won. Very, very simple. So, yeah, let's put that into action. Yeah, and one last thing that I should actually say before I depart to fast forward time. Yeah, so basically, in case that wasn't obvious, take all your colonial units, which you have some in North Africa, West Africa, in Lebanon, even 1 on Madagascar, and 3 in Vietnam, and just bring them all home. There's no point to them really being there at all. Italy might take some of your African possessions, but by the time they can really do any damage, and really they can't really do any real damage, but you will have conquered Italy, or they would have brought their troops back to help defend Italy. Either way, while they're busy maybe doing something to you in Africa, you've taken their homeland. And you should actually have defeated Germany before Japan defeats China, if Japan does defeat China. So you don't need to defend French Indochina, as Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia are known in this time period. Yeah, you don't need any troops there to defend. And if you did have troops there, could you really defend from Japan, who obviously their main army is all there? Your main army is in Europe. So yeah, just bring back all your colonial troops and send them to the front lines. Essentially, all of your units, put them all in one pile. I've taken this guy is a level 4 general who has the trickster trait. I turn him into 1 field marshal, because he's not old guard. You can swap in one of your old guard field marshals if you're just defensively holding the line, but then you can just swap in your offensive field marshal, as this guy will become, whenever you need, and obviously put all your armored troops in under the control of this Panzer leader general. Alphonse Juin has a skill level of 4, while Charles de Gaulle only has a skill level of 3. And then I put my mountain guys into a separate faction, or a separate army, just so that it doesn't get destroyed when I do this. Changing all of those to infantry, so they're all standardized, and changing all of these to division leger, however you pronounce that, essentially light armor divisions, and then set them all starting to exercise. Yeah, I'm having a bit of lag because I'm actually rendering a view in the background. Anyway, and then there's no penalty to having one field marshal command all of your troops, so you may as well do that and have all the experience going towards him. I would suggest, in terms of front lines, I think, so you have 61 here. I lean towards a kind of a 20 infantry on this line, 20 divisions on this line, including your mountaineers on this, and then the rest on that. And then when you get so when you've trained some new recruits, I would put 10 of those new recruits there. So like about 30 divisions of infantry on the south, and then the rest up here. So that will be 50 or 60 divisions of infantry on your northern front line, because that one's going to get stretched out a lot more. Essentially, I get my infantry here to just attack to take this line here. Actually, let's just make some front lines. Don't really need to select who's on what for now. I would go with these front lines. So I take something, not like that, like this, just to start with, and then when kind of Roman Naples is taken, then those can expand to move forward, or they can just start moving forward naturally anyway, to take Venice, if Venice is really necessary. As I mentioned, half of your guys will go. Actually, that's not right. Delete that order. Half of your guys will go on a naval invasion from here to there, and then. Okay, why is that going through there? Last time I did it didn't pass through there, but anyway, they're there, and then the other guys, and obviously with kind of a front line, something like that, and then the other guys will go from a front line of here, I would say, and from there push down to that, and then they'll meet each other, and they will have taken all the important bits of Italy. I'd actually just, by the way, when you reach Messina, that's gonna suddenly remove the front line that you had with Italy and delete that order, so you're gonna have to manually move your troops across the little strait, and then with this new front line start them marching up. But that's basically what you're going to do, and then later on, when they've finished that order, you are going to then have something like not that front line, not with Luxembourg, with something like this, and then just go to Berlin, and then after they go to Berlin, go here. Go on. Yep, go like that. And cut off basically the supply of all those, and then go something like. Ooh, actually could. Well, essentially you're going to start pushing all the way to this border here, all the way from there, eventually. And that was going to cut off all the sea supply. Once you take Berlin, actually, the capital is going to move to either Munich or Vienna. And so that really means if you cut some kind of line, even if you actually brought your armored troops back and then made another spearhead across to here, if you do something, that's going to cut off all the supply of all the troops from the capital in Vienna, and then they're going to have to ship supplies from here, from in the Mediterranean all the way around. So if you've cut the coast off, then that removes that possibility, but also your submarines hopefully should shoot all their convoys down. And that will be the end of their fun. So yeah, here we are. We are, I think, either 7 or 8 days. I guess it's August 30th goes, so that's a day of August 30th. So 8 days before Sudetenland, well, before Germany demands Sudetenland, and yeah, and then war will break out a few days after that, and then a few days after that, Italy will probably join. So, given that assumption, we are gonna crush Italy as soon as possible, as fast as possible. So, infantry holding a line against that's the river. Is that the? Does it tell you which river it is? I forget which river that is. Anyway, but anyway, so we crush Italy as soon as possible. They capitulate, and then we can move our armoured spearhead up to here, where it can take Berlin, and then that will move the capital of Germany somewhere else, and thus the source of all the supplies somewhere else, and then that will actually make it a lot easier to encircle. I think it will move it to Vienna. Maybe there's something else that has 30 victory points. Oh yeah. Well, if we haven't taken Munich, maybe we'll go to Munich. But anyway, that yeah, and then we can easily encircle all the remaining Germans with our armoured spearhead. In terms of research, like obviously I've just completed improved infantry equipment 1. I have I just had a few extra. I had some free research essentially where I didn't need to do anything important, so I thought I may as well make my fleet a bit stronger. So we're basically aiming to have all these. I mean, this is going to be slightly late, but yeah, that's not as important. Similarly, this is going to be. That's just not right. Yeah, 60 days, yeah, because we had a bonus on it. Yeah, so similarly, that is going to, yeah, they're going to kick in. We got our production things first. I haven't done the research time stuff because, yeah, and the decryption simply because I suddenly realized I needed to have my supports in place. Something I really need to encourage is that so I have my 3 divisions that I'm using. So this is how I've set them up, and essentially I gradually made changes to all of them slowly. So like for instance, I put in swapped in an artillery for an infantry on this one, and then I swapped in some self-propelled artillery for the motorized on this one, and I swapped in some artillery into this one, or added some artillery, and gradually changed all of them so that essentially while these guys were exercising, getting me the army experience required to and I've stopped them exercise like I think a month ago, so they could get ready for war. Yeah, so while these guys were exercising, they were actually increasing their training level, and obviously it didn't fully work for some of them, well, for a lot of them, but it meant that as the changes occurred, which drops down the unit experience, they could sort of recoup that experience loss as they went. So if you made all the changes at the very end, just before the war happens, then they're going to be low level experience, where if you make as many changes as possible at the start, so changing all of your division templates slowly and gradually, as soon as you have the experience points, then all of them end up being roughly the same. Right, well, all of them roughly get the same amount of training as they're going along. The real kicker here, the thing that next, if I was to ever do this again, I would suggest that you actually, well, if you're making the same kind of divisions, that you unlock the engineer company a lot earlier. I unlocked it late because it's not something you need to build. Because you're building your support equipment anyway. But I think when you put in an engineer company, that engineer company suddenly drops the experience down a lot, I guess, because the division needs to train a special support company, and that requires a lot more training time. I think is it actually, does it add 10 days of training time or something like that? Let's click on something. What's the... Oh no, it doesn't actually add training time, but yeah. Anyway, that made my units drop down in experience significantly. So maybe you want to put in the engineers first before you start putting in the artillery into your templates. But yeah, hopefully I certainly will win this, because I know I can, because I've done it before. So here we are, a few days into the war. Italy hasn't come in yet. This is a kind of abnormally late Italy entrance, hasn't entered the Axis in this war. But you can see the setup here. Germany does have a numerical advantage against Czechoslovakia, but it doesn't have a huge numerical advantage. It will win, it will force back, but these one divisions along the Czech border should probably be enough to hold them, especially because they're one unit's in hills or mountains in some cases, forests. There's mountains. Yep. So they have good defensive bonuses. So defensively, they can hold, especially if the Romanians actually take their units and do something with them, which I assume they are, but they're not. Okay. But Germany has actually massed a lot of guys against Yugoslavia, which Yugoslavia has an even better defended border here. Firstly because, mostly better terrain here, but also because it's a skinny border with Germany. And a skinny border is very easy to defend even if you're a miner, because as you can see, Yugoslavia can pile lots of troops in, and they've got some depth there. So how many guys are there here? Well, Germany does not have many, and we're pushing them back. And yeah, so it is actually pretty easy to defeat Germany by offensively moving out of the Maginot Line and forwards, at least with the AI as it currently is. I don't know if this is mostly an AI problem, not defending the border that isn't the Sudetenland border at this point, or whether it's just me being good. Who knows? Maybe this is how France should have fought the war, but we'll never know that because we can't have time machines.